All right. So hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to our panel, Writing a Successful Graduate Fellowship Application. And just to let you know, the structure of the event will be that we'll hear from each of our 4 panelists in turn, and then we'll have an open session where you can just ask questions, things you wanted to know about the application process. And I also wanted to just note before we started that we're going to follow up in mid-October with a workshop where you can bring in your specific aims that you've written already and get some feedback on them before you actually submit your grant. So if you're going to submit a grant, you might want to think about drafting the aims early so that you're going to have thought about them by the time of the workshop. So we're really lucky to have 4 amazing speakers tonight. First, we're going to hear from Professor Aude Oliva. She joined the Faculty of Brain and Cognitive Sciences in 2002, and then she joined CSAIL in 2012 as a principal research scientist. Her work is highly transdisciplinary, and she builds on both human and computer vision to understand high-level recognition problems, such as perceiving space, recognizing objects, and predicting subjective properties of images, such as memorability. Her research has been featured in textbooks of perception, cognition, computer vision, design, and also in museums of art and of science. Professor Sangeeta Bhatia, who we have next, is a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator and the John J. and Dorothy Wilson Professor of Health Sciences and Technology. She's also in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science and the Institute for Medical Engineering and Science at MIT. Her lab is focused on the applications of micro and nanotechnology for tissue repair and for regeneration, and her work has been profiled by Scientific American, PBS Nova, and The Economist. Next, we have Dr. Steve Smriga, who is a postdoc here at MIT. He's in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. He received his PhD from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and his background is in both microbiology and oceanography. He's previously won an NSF fellowship for his work in oceanography, and he can talk about the experience of applying for a multidisciplinary grant. And Javier Sanchez is a 5th-year PhD student here in physics. He received the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, and he was also a finalist for the Hertz Fellowship as well, so he has experience applying for both the government and for private fellowships. So thank you guys so much for being here, and I'm going to pass this to Aude to start with her overview of predoctoral fellowships.
Oh well, it's a little... Hello everybody. I'm going to give a very short overview, so then that can prime some of the questions you will have later on the predoctoral fellowship. So I've been teaching a seminar in the Brain and Cognitive Science about predoctoral fellowship for 7 years. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot, like in a few slides, of some of the principles you may want to follow. And although I'm going to, most of my slides are going to talk about the NSF and the NDSCG that are for US citizen or permanent resident, there are about 33 other fellowship at this website, which is one of the websites hosted by my lab, which is going to be mirrored at other places at MIT. So if you don't get it right now, you can have access to it later. So let me see, because right now it's kind of not showing the slide. Oh, I think it might be okay. They are. Okay, well, we can. So it's not 3, it's 33 more. Okay, so the NSF, all the deadlines are in November, okay? 13, 14, 16, coming up in about 6 weeks. And this fellowship concerns almost all the discipline that you're doing. And so you can apply if you're an undergraduate student or a graduate student in your 1st and 2nd year. So if you are in the 1st year, it will be much, you will have a higher chance to get the fellowship in the 1st year than in the 2nd year, on average again, because in the 2nd year, the reviewer will expect you to have done more. So if you have the possibility to apply in 6 weeks, you should do it. So for the NSF, because you have to send some of your transcript, and this may take a while, I really recommend you want to do the NSF, log on to the system by this weekend, because you don't have so much time. You also want to start looking at the information you you want to give, as well as finding your reference letters and also other information that you can send them. So my message here is that really go to check it out this weekend because you don't have so much time. So the basic idea for the NSF is that the reviewer are going to look for two criteria, and they both are weighted about 50% each. One is the intellectual criteria, and the other one, and I'm sure we're going to speak quite a bit about it, is what is called the broader impact. So the intellectual merit criterion, there is description on the website. You can go and read it in details. The basic idea is things that are related to your class, your GRE, and basically the research you have done on the undergraduate level or during your first year, ability to plan, conduct research, work in a team, work independently, interpret, communicate research, and so on. There are plenty of examples on their website. And so there's also, I made a list over the years, you can relate to the experience you had in a previous lab or in the classroom, or because you were a TA, or because you were helping other students, because you give lectures. So if you don't have a research experience per se, you can draw on your experience of collaborating into a lab class or in other venues when you were an undergraduate, in order to describe and give information related to the intellectual merit. So presentation, conferences, application to various fellowship, also if you went to summer school and so on, all count as guideline, as fact that will show that you are really into research and development. So the broader impact criterion is usually where most people, have trouble, basically, because what does it mean? Well, it's a little vague, but there are some, it always stay around some keywords, the notion of education, learning, communication of your research and your finding to a larger audience. So how is your research going to benefit society at large? And you can come up with hundreds of different examples of how different research will have an impact. Could be in the medical domain, could be in robotics, could be for the aging population, could be for cars or vehicles, and so on. So each of you is doing a unique research, and each of you can find something that will have an impact on the society. So the NSF FastLane application module has several sections. Please go and check it out. Transcript, personal profile, and so on. And you have 3 research statements to write. And the basic advice I will give you is that insert in your 3 research statements, the personal statement, the previous research experience, and the proposed plan of research, both concrete example of intellectual merit and the broader impact. So those are, in my experience helping students who then won the fellowship, those should be inserted in those 3 proposals. So here's just a general schema of how to structure the 2 pages for the plan of research. This is what I've been using with the student I've been helping for years. And so maybe this will be posted, the slide might be useful if it is posted somewhere on the web, particularly, hopefully it will not be cut. But what you want to remember is that people that are going to review your application, review a lot of applications, so you want, of course, to write clearly and so on, and you all know this. But there's some structure that make the reading easier, and also some structure that will help the reader and show what you are doing that is unique and very interesting. So beside the introduction, most of the research ground that you're going to be writing during your graduate, academic years, and so on are structured around objective or aims, usually 2 or 3. So if you develop a research program in 2 pages for the next 3 years, I recommend you structure it around 2 ID, 2 aims, or 2 objectives. And it's very important to have 1/3 at least of a broader impact section inserted into your proposed plan of research and some conclusions. So this is the basic idea. The NDSCG, the deadline is mid-December, is also for US citizen and permanent resident of the US, and it has also all the topic that you guys are working on. So this one, if I will have one shot at giving you an advice, is that, well, the research summary, which is the core of what you're proposing doing in order to win the fellowship, it's only 3,000 characters. It's one page. Writing a summary, it's difficult, actually more difficult than writing several pages, so start earlier. And of course, it needs to be clear, it needs to have paragraph and so on. But here are examples of two people who won the NDSCG. Those were actually two women who won this. And I took their pages and I extracted the keywords that jump at me while I was reading those texts, knowing that the NDSCG is going to look for research that is more related to the Department of Defense, the Office of Naval Research, and so on. And as you can see, there was this structure with some very strong keywords that were kind of well placed in the text. So it seems that writing something short, you also need, of course, to have the content, but have something like, kind of catchy, I would say. So finally, and I think this is maybe where we might have the most discussion. So there is, I put together this website, which has 35 different fellowships. Let me just, okay, good. And so most of them are for US citizens, but there are at least 5 to 8 for international students, for you to do graduate study in the US or go abroad, but mostly in the US. So I recommend that you go there, you check them out, and I hope you find one of them. It's a very long list, but most of the deadlines are this semester, so keep your eyes open. Thanks.
That was great. Very informative. I wish I had that website of 33.
Well, it's for everybody, so please.
I didn't know about it.
Yeah, I can certainly give the slide, of course, yeah.
So I was asked to focus my comments on how to write the research proposal section of your fellowship application, but just to sort of reiterate some of what you've heard. So the things that you're being scored on are, of course, your credentials, so your grades, your GREs. It's important to include publications as well as conference abstracts. And then also a lot of times students forget awards or prominent leadership positions. There are lots of things that you can use on your resume that aren't sort of classical publications. Of course, your letters of recommendation. So I think we can ask your colleagues about who to get those from. Obviously, people who know you well and who are well respected. So there's a balance, I think, of, sometimes you'll see applications come in with like an athletic coach or somebody who knew sort of multiple dimensions of your personality, and that's okay, but you should definitely also have faculty that are respected by the place that you're applying to. And okay, so credentials, letters, then the research proposal, which I'm going to tell you more about. Prior research, and importantly, sort of if you're already here, if you're a first year, for example, a sort of soft criterion that they're looking for is how embedded you are already in a lab. So we can talk about this during the question and answer period. You might not already be embedded in a lab. So how do you handle that? How do you talk about your work in that context? But it's often a terrific way to go meet a new advisor to actually say, I want to write this NSF application. I love your research. Can you spend a few weeks with me? And they'll like you and you'll like them, and you might end up joining the lab whether or not you actually win the fellowship. So it can be a good excuse. And it is a criterion that people use. Okay, so the research proposal part, the 1 or 2 pages that you're writing about, what should that be about? So first of all, you have to pick a topic that's exciting, that you know something about. This is actually really hard. But once you do it, I think the first paragraph should have 3 main points. So the first point that you should always start with is, why is this important? Kind of really big picture. Why is the thing I'm proposing to do relevant? And then the next point you should make is cover what has been done in the field and what's missing. So this is not a literature review. This is a very sort of specific take on the field where you look at what's been done and you're knowledgeable about what's been done. So I work on nanotechnology, so imagine it's targeted drug delivery. You sort of have to find a way to encompass what's been done in the field so it makes it look like you're knowledgeable, and then identify those couple of opportunities that you're going to then write the rest of the proposal about. Okay? So why is this important? What's been done and what's missing? And then lastly, what you're proposing to do. So this is a lot to cover in just a few sentences. It's sort of like your first paragraph, but you have to kind of get to the point quickly, and it should be exciting, as was pointed out, and relevant to the mission of the agency. So then we were talking about structure earlier. I think a structure that most reviewers are familiar with are something called specific aims. Have you guys heard of that structure? Yes? No? No. I see no nodding heads. Yes, how about hands? Specific aims. Maybe half of you. Okay, so you can divide a project basically up into a bunch of sections, 2 or 3 objectives or specific aims. So in a nanotech project, I might say, if I wanted to do targeted drug delivery for cancer, I might say specific aim 1 is to identify a material that will target this particular cancer cells. Specific aim 2 is to test its efficacy in cell culture, and specific aim 3 is to test it in a mouse model of cancer. That would be an example of aims. So you have to sort of take your project and divide it into 2 or 3 pieces that can be described in kind of a one-liner. And the pieces have to build on each other. So by the end of the second or third aim, you've gotten just what we call sort of a crescendo. Right, so it's sort of a stepwise building of your expertise and knowledge until you get to this crescendo at the end. The other thing about the specific aims is that they shouldn't be too interdependent. So in the example that I gave was like we would synthesize particles, test them in cell culture, and test them in animals. A potential criticism might be like, well, what if it doesn't work in aim 1? Right? Like, what if you never synthesize them? Your whole proposal falls apart. So we call that a fatal flaw, and that's something that reviewers are always looking for, because the typical scenario is someone is sitting, in bed with a stack of 50 applications, like looking to sort out the ones that are exciting, right? So you don't want a fatal flaw in your application. So what you can do then when you write about each specific aim is talk about what the specific aim is, what exactly you're proposing to do, either experimentally on the computer, and then throw kind of a one-liner in there about what you'll do if it doesn't work. So if it doesn't work how I planned, these other materials that are available to me in the lab, them I'm already in, and I'll use those instead. So kind of an alternate scheme. Okay, so you've got this intro paragraph, why what you're studying is important, what's been done and what's missing, and what you're proposing. You have 3 specific aims. And now at the end, you've sort of arrived at your crescendo. You've talked about what the crescendo experiments are, and it's nice to sort of end with an impact statement, bringing it kind of back around to the beginning, saying why, if you're successful, this would be important work, and tying into the impact criteria at NSF. I'm happy to answer questions about any of this. I have handouts that I give to my class. The last thing I'll say about the NSF impact statement specifically is that it is really vague. What I find works well for my students is if they highlight not just the intellectual impact of their projects, so healthcare, energy, and so on, but also if you've done things like outreach or podcasting or worked at the Museum of Science, ways that sort of things where you've gone out of your way to specifically disseminate the work to the lay public. That plays really well at the NSF, typically. Okay.
My name is Steve, and I'm a postdoc at... sure, we can work on that. Well, maybe I'll plug it in I'm going to talk for a minute. So I was asked to share some of my experiences applying for fellowships. I've been a postdoc here for a couple of years, and before that I was a graduate student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I had applied for the NSF. I've received the NSF pre-doctoral fellowship, and just recently a postdoctoral fellowship, and have been part of a couple of NSF full fellowships, full research fellowships, where I was working with a professor and contributing. So well, a lot of my experiences with NSF applications. And I also applied for NDSEG and EPA STAR and some of these other ones that are out there. And so my experience was I applied as a senior undergraduate and didn't get the fellowship. Then I applied as a first-year graduate student and didn't get the fellowship. And I applied for as a second-year graduate student and finally got the fellowship in the NSF. And the first one, it was very kind of immature process. I didn't really interact very much with prospective professor. In the first year, I was already in a lab, so I had I think a pretty good research proposal. It wasn't quite strong enough. And then the second year, my experience as a first year combined with better knowledge and better writing technique, I think that's what really helps make that application successful. And so from that, I would say time is the biggest thing to think about. And both the previous speakers sort of brought up start early, and I would say that's really something to keep in mind and prioritize. So start writing now. Work on it for a couple of weeks and share it with someone. Get feedback. Share it with a grad student that's more senior in your group. Share it with a postdoc. Share it with the potential PI that you want to work with. They'll give you feedback. They'll help you shape the proposal to make it something that is really robust and defensible. And even if you don't have an idea right now about what your research project is, and you feel like you are going to get locked into something that you have to do, I would say NSF is a little bit flexible. What you want to demonstrate is that you can think about science and that you can demonstrate your ability to address an issue, find an issue, and then research and learn the background and communicate clearly what you plan to do to address that. So even if it's not something that you think is the most important for your long-term career, you want to pick a topic and focus it. I would say you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Like, you don't want to propose something that's so grand that it can't be done in 3 years. Remember that if you're reading this as an outsider, you want to have some kind of faith that the grad student would be able to do this and would be able to accomplish what they're saying they're going to accomplish in that time frame. I think if you're, in my experience, if you're a senior undergraduate and you get a fellowship, that gives you a lot of flexibility for choosing which grad school you might be able to go to. And it will also help you open doors for some professors that have no funding. So I've seen folks that try to work with professors and they say, sorry, I can't take any graduate students because I don't have any grant money. But if you have your own fellowship, you can come and work with me, and then in 3 years' time, we'll probably have another grant, or we'll find some other source of funding to cover you for when your fellowship runs out. So it's a nice flexibility that's given to you if you are able to get one as an undergraduate. And I think I'll show you an example of my research essay from my most recent postdoctoral fellowship to just kind of reiterate some of the things that they brought up. But I would just comment on the previous research essay for the NSF. And this is building on what was brought up, that you should always give examples within those essays about intellectual merit and broader impacts. I would also say, talk about, from each of your experiences, don't make it a laundry list of what you did, but maybe choose a few key activities that you had and talk about what you learned from those activities, and how did those activities influence your motivation for your current study. Why did you get to where you are today? How come you're interested in doing science? Why demonstrate to the reader why you have an inquisitive mind and why you're interested in answering questions. Okay, so. Oh, sure, okay. So I won't take too long to do this, but just as an example of what something might look like. This is for a postdoctoral fellowship, so it's much bigger. It's like 15 pages or 12 pages, so it's much longer than something you would see for an NSF fellowship. But driving home some of the points, like the first paragraph is critical. You really want to hook the reader. And so I think a paragraph of roughly this length works. I have some introductory sentences as to why the problem is important. And then what I wanted to point out is that I think it's really important to state your hypotheses very clearly, very bold. So even if the reader doesn't read the first paragraph, they go right to those hypotheses and they see them and say, this is what this person is interested in. And you're demonstrating you're doing hypothesis-driven science. So then I expand on those hypotheses later in the proposal. So I have hypothesis 1, the community composition, etc. And I say, to address that hypothesis, I have one objective here. The first objective is to do an assay of selection of chemical compounds. Then there's another objective. So I have tasks or objectives that fit to each of those hypotheses. Here's the second hypothesis with related objectives, etc. There's images in this proposal, but in a 2-page or 1-page proposal, there won't be room for that, most likely, right? And finally, to expand on the sort of broader impacts to what's already been said, here's some examples for what I've done and had success with. I sort of talk about broadening participation as one of the broader impacts of my work. For me, that's been being really active in a program called National Ocean Science Bowl. I've mentored undergraduates, but as a first-year graduate student, you probably haven't done too much mentoring, but maybe you've worked in groups, as it's been said, you've worked with teams, or maybe you have been a mentor to freshman or sophomore undergraduates. In this case, I'm helping to develop an educational video game. These kinds of things where you're doing outreach, you're showing that you have an interest in sharing your knowledge with broader society. That kind of activity is really appealing to a lot of the reviewers at NSF. So hopefully that was helpful, and I'll pass it on to Javier.
Hello. So who here is actually thinking about applying for the NSF fellowship this year? Okay, so majority of people. And is anyone interested in the Hertz fellowship at all? Okay. All right. So so regarding the Hertz, so first I'll talk about NSF, then Hertz. Yeah. So regarding and also who's a first-year graduate student? Okay, and who's a second year? Okay, and then third year plus. Anybody? Okay. Not to out you. Okay. So I guess. Yeah, so I applied for an NSF fellowship in my senior year of undergraduate, and I got it. And I guess if you're a first year in graduate school, though, I mean, you're only a couple months here. Clearly, you're not that much different than the ones who applied a year before, except you've had another full year of undergraduate courses. But you probably haven't started doing very heavy-duty research yet. Some of the questions that seem to be given beforehand involved around some anxiety regarding this issue. You don't know, you don't have a research advisor yet. You don't know what research project you're going to work on. These sort of things. And so, I think one thing to keep in mind is that unlike fellowships that faculty apply for, there's no follow-up review or renewal that you have to go through. Okay, so this is not the research project you're going to have is not binding. Sorry, I'm going to sit down. Actually, So I think this was kind of mentioned before, that it's more important to demonstrate kind of your ability to formulate a research plan. I mean, I think definitely they are looking for certain research projects and key areas to hit, but I wouldn't be so focused on like, oh, I don't really know if a year from now this is what I'm going to be continuing working on. I mean, I think if you're in a research group, obviously it makes sense then to use the kind of research plan that your faculty member has. If you don't have a research group yet, seek out potential faculty you're interested in and talk to them. And in some cases, don't be afraid to even ask to maybe look at their own research proposal, or at least some of the motivations aspects of it. I've seen some graduate students that I've interacted with who've actually done this. The advisor already had an NSF grant, and he basically got to look at that grant and see kind of what were the motivations that the faculty member used. Obviously, you should not just copy and paste that. You want to put in your own words, because it's going to be very obvious that it's more a faculty proposal as opposed to a student one. Okay, so there's that. Regarding broader impacts, this is also another thing that when you look at the NSF guidelines, a lot of these things, they really they're very similar, actually, or almost exactly the same as the ones that are given for faculty. And of course, it's different if you're a graduate student, if you haven't been doing a lot of research and stuff like that. So I think things that you can try, at least what worked for me, I actually had a separate section in my personal statement that, just like Steve had, that said broader impact. So I had it listed out very specifically there. And then some of the things that I tried, I also know other people have tried, is putting things like mentoring students, teaching some classes, doing some tutoring sessions even. I mean, you want to put something there, okay? So, you know, even if you have to scrape the barrel a little bit, you know, I think things like tutoring and stuff like that, you know, you're disseminating scientific information, you know. And then you could even try to be a little creative in the 1 month that you have until the deadline, right? Some other possibilities to think about are things like volunteering at the Boston Science Museum, helping with teaching displays. There's even online, there are various websites. I know one that has physics demonstrations, which they need volunteers for doing translations of the, into different languages of the physics demonstrations, or even helping out with those. So these are just some things to consider. And the idea here is to show that you have an interest and appreciation for disseminating scientific information to, you know, young students, or also just society in general. Okay, and then so Hertz, I can talk about this more if there are questions, but the Hertz Fellowship is unique in that it's for a long period of time, so it's 5 years, so it's a lot of funding, but it also is quite selective in that it requires an initial application and then 2 rounds of oral interview, which are, can be a bit tough, actually. So it's a bit of a different, interesting experience, and I can talk about that more, but basically you will actually meet in person with somebody, and they will kind of grill you a little bit. The questions can be very broad, very general about science or about your research very specifically. And it's very similar to kind of what you might experience in a PhD oral exam, although much shorter and not so specialized. So that can seem a little bit stressful. It's a little bit fun, but it can vary a lot with your interviewee. But it is a very selective fellowship in the end. So it has like only, I think, around 20 or so people that actually get it in the end. So I can answer more questions about that if there are. Yeah. So I mean, maybe you have, I think not. I don't know of any fellowship actually has a follow-up where they actually check to see that you did the research that you proposed. I mean, people change advisors, and you don't lose your fellowship if you change advisors. In fact, that's supposed to be the perk, is that you have that flexibility. So, I mean, again, I don't think you should write about something that you have no interest of doing whatsoever, or you really are planning to change to something else. But it's just something that, you know, you should not be feel so anxious about whether this is really to the letter of what you're going to be doing. So maybe I can just open it to questions. Yeah.
Hello? So I can pass these right here, and I can pass that mic so this will also. If anyone has a question.
How many fellowships would it, like, a reasonable amount be to apply to? I mean, in terms of time constraints and other considerations.
So if you can apply to the NSF, do it. Then the NDSCG, do it, because you take your NSF and then it's a summary. So that will be an excellent goal for this semester. And then there are a couple more that are more for computer science that come in January, February. And it's on the same topic. Why don't you try out? So I would say, for instance, my students, I made them at least apply to 2 or 3. It depends on the... So I would say this is that. Well, that's for the first year or the second year. So then some of the fellowship are more for more advanced students in your 3rd or your 4th. So if you have no luck for the early one, then you can try 1 or 2 more later on. So 2, 3 seems a good number. Also, each time it's like a few pages, and once you have done one, well, it's 80% of the work. Mm-hmm.
My question question is that I'm applying for the Harvard Fellows Program, and they have asked for a 2-page research proposal of what I'm going to do. They haven't asked for a summary of my contributions or what I've already done. So should I be including a little bit of what I've done in that, or that is just supposed to be exclusively what I plan to do?
Are you talking about a faculty fellows application?
No, it's postdoc.
A postdoc fellows.
Yeah.
Between postdoc and faculty? Harvard has a couple different fellows programs.
Oh, it's the one that you apply after you get your PhD.
So
I believe it's called Junior Fellows Program.
yeah. So I would say they come actually, I've seen both versions. You have to think about kind of what's the most compelling case for you. I would say to spend at least 2/3 of it on what you will do. Some people will spend kind of the first half of a page on what they've done previously, depending on how much data you have on what you're proposing. If it's sort of just blue sky, you want to show that you've made some contributions already in an area, then you could spend the first half a page on what you've contributed already and how that sets you up for what you're going to do next.
So then how does this fit with the structure you suggested, that the first paragraph should be about what's important, what's been done, what's missing, and what I plan to do? So after I say that, then I start by talking about what I've already done?
Yeah, so I think in this case, the structure I described would be for the second half, for your actual proposal. And then you'll have to you'd have to come up with a preamble to describe both projects and a transition between the two. Then when you get to what your future proposal, then you would say, why is this area important, et cetera, and have the aims.
So first I basically describe what I've already done and give a brief summary of that, and then transition into what I'm going to be doing.
Only if you feel like, I mean, it might be helpful to actually have someone look at it, to get a sense for whether you feel like it's making you more competitive. But sometimes people do that when they feel like they don't have enough data on what they're proposing in the future.
Okay, thank you.
No, I will add that if your postdoc proposal has a follow-up from what you did in graduate school, then basically your work can be included in the background as when you speak about the studies of others. So you have the background of what of the field, and then you include yourself in this paragraph. So then it goes well with what you said. So both options will be fine. But if it's a follow-up, then it can look nice if you have yourself in the background study.
So I'm wondering if, can you guys hear me? That's good. I'll hold it closer. How independent does my proposal have to be? As in, if I'm working in a research group that the group has a goal that we're already working toward, can I kind of propose I'm going to be working toward this group goal, or is it more that I have to come up with some individual project that and present it as more like my own idea and my own research?
I would say both will work because it depends on the research in the lab. Like so I will have experience on the brain science part, but if it's a lab working on social cognition, for instance, so then you can be part of it. In other cases, if there's many different aspects of research in this lab, then you can go on one side by yourself. It all depends on how it's framed. As long as it is framed well, and then we can see your contribution, I would say both are good.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think it's a strength, to have a topic that's leveraging an environment, as long as you very clearly articulate what you will be doing and that you know experimentally or computationally what you will be doing.
And also the fact that the environment will provide you with the techniques and the expertise. They want to see that in your proposal. Okay, that is not that you choose that lab on purpose. So you also need to say, well, they have what I want.
I mean, I would go down a limb to say that, that's okay. Majority of these proposals are not truly original in the research path, right? Especially people in your first person wants a graduate school versus, I mean, that's great, there probably are some people who do, but I mean, the proposal as written should be original, but the actual idea presumably is going to come from some currently existing research path.
Okay, I get 3 questions, but 2 are really quick ones. One, it sounds like all NSF fellowships are only for U.S. citizens or permanent residents. Would that be correct? Yeah, okay. Second one is, do you know of any place other than your website where there's a list of a lot of fellowships or something like that? And
Yes, there is another website. I can send information to Laura.
okay. And the third question.
Put it on the website, yes.
Okay. The third question is, I'm now working on writing a personal fellowship application and also on co-authoring an NSF grant application for a larger project. Can you say a couple of words on if there's any differences in terms of stresses? What would you? I mean, a lot of the things are the same, right? You have to put in a goal and so on, but is there anything that I should stress more in one or the other?
So I guess it depends on the scope of the larger project, but one common pitfall for students writing fellowship applications was alluded to earlier, which is the scope of the work. So, you join a lab. So in my lab, we say like, oh, we're really interested in new antiviral drugs for hepatitis C, right? You're not going to do that in 3 years. So you have to pick something that you could do with your own 2 hands in 3 man-years, whereas a much larger project will have more ambitious goals, typically.
Yeah. But basically, the structure is very similar. But indeed, you're one-man work for the fellowship.
So in terms of getting references, obviously, ideally you want people who know you and who are well respected. But let's say you've only worked, say, very closely with 1 or 2 professors in the past, or scientists or whatever, and you only know. And say, so I'm a first-year graduate student. My advisor doesn't necessarily know me that well, right? Can't speak to the things that I've done necessarily, other than what he's been told. Would you recommend in that case, having him be a reference, or just using people that I've used in the past? What importance does, how well you know the person play into the whole situation?
I think in my experience is that people that know you well can write a more informed letter and can give it a lot, and that gives it a lot more weight because they can speak not only to your abilities but to your personality, and that will help to, sort of describe you to this sort of complete stranger pool of reviewers, right, that are never going to meet you face to face, but they can kind of read this letter and get a sense for who you are as a person. And so I think in my earlier fellowship applications, I had letters from the postdocs that I worked with rather than the principal investigator, because that's who I was interacting with every day. And I think I had a letter from a professor of a microbiology class that was really time intensive. So, she got to know me pretty well, as well as a lot of other students, and can speak to, like I said, the abilities and you as a person.
If sometimes for that third letter, usually you find like 2 is easy, but the third one is kind of hard. I've had students of mine ask people they're working with, would you feel comfortable writing me a strong letter? So that way, people kind of have the out to say, I really don't know you that well, I don't know what I would write. And I've said that to students, it's not that I don't support your case, I just we haven't had that much work to do together. So finding a way to ask somebody if you're not sure is also helpful.
So for the Hertz Fellowship, there's a specific question that deals with like how your proposed field field of study is an application of a physical science or engineering, but what if that field of study is such a type of engineering? That question confuses me a little bit, of like to what extent that should be, like kind of what was your approach to writing that question?
Okay, so I mean, in my case, I would think I had the extreme example that I'm a physicist and my research was actually quite basic science. So I feel I had to take more of a stretch to say how this is applied. But in the end, most research at some point has some application, right? Now, I think your question is that you think your research is already applied. But I mean, that's still, then you just have to kind of state what you think is obvious then, right? Like what is the end goal of your research? Who is it going to benefit? Society, business, industry, otherwise, right? So I think that's kind of what that question is getting at. So, and it hurts, they're all about, they're providing this money because they want it as a benefit to society as a whole. So you have to say how your research eventually will, I think.
This is about more specialized fellowships like, Facebook fellowship or something. So if you're applying to such a fellowship, then do they expect you to have done research in the areas they're interested in, or it could be as a proposal? Say, if you weren't working on computer vision before, but now you want to work on it, and then you're applying to a Facebook fellowship, is that considered a handicap, or how does it work?
So this fellowship is relatively new. So I think that their website has some, section, and I will say it's pretty open. But if you can fit in one of the sections, as always. So I think it's a fellowship which is going to certainly evolve. It's only maybe 1 or 2 years old. So go on the website and see the information there. It's very new.
Yeah, I'll just add, this is sort of part of a larger career theme for a lot of you, which is kind of stitching your own narrative for your career arc, trying to find a way to talk about your research experiences so that they build on each other and they build up different dimensions of your work. So it's always great if you can say, well, not that I never did computer vision before, but I did some other part of machine learning or whatever, and I want to now come and connect it to what you're offering. That's always a stronger story.
This will probably be the last question.
Hi, I liked all your advice, but examples usually help me the most. Do you know if there's a place where I can get some examples of successful essays and proposals, or would you guys be willing to put yours out there?
You can find online. Maybe I'll post a link, submit the link. There are multiple links online where you can find examples of successful NSF applications. And also another link I'll include is also there's some good resources online on general kind of science writing, and those are also pretty useful as well. They have good examples of like terrible science writing, and then they correct it, and you can see how it works out in the end. So I'll submit those links, but probably those are teach classes.
May I add that I asked, when I was a first-year graduate student, I asked for examples from other people at Scripps that had gotten the fellowships, because then it's very close to your field, and you can kind of see what's been successful. And in that, it really helped me see how to make the research, that I needed to make the research proposals stronger. But it also helped me see that I was spending too much time on the personal essay. I learned, well, if you had sort of a mediocre personal essay, you can still get the fellowship. I'm not trying to say you don't need to spend time on it, but it changed my perspective on that a little bit. I was just going to add one other thing, somewhat related, but I have the review sheet, the rating sheet from years ago, and underneath the intellectual merit criteria, there's basically 5 things that have already been mentioned: proposed plan of research, which is probably the number one thing, of course, previous research, academic record, etc. But under broader impacts, the way that that's sort of broken down is foster integration of research and education, advance diversity in science, enhance scientific and technical understanding, and benefit society. And for each of those four, you're rated on a scale of excellent to poor. So it's, even though we talk about it 50-50, we kind of can get some idea of what falls into that 50%.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. Can I just note to please take your plates out with you as you go, and also a reminder that we will have a workshop where you can get individual feedback. And lastly, can we please thank our speakers again? It was really generous of you guys to donate your time.